Chris Eubank Jr. has thrown boxing into debate again, declaring he's ready for Terence Crawford, Canelo Álvarez, and even a returning Gennadiy Golovkin. At 36, his career stands at a crossroads. One path leads to legacy, the other to obscurity. But is he chasing greatness or overreaching? Each name he's called out unravels a bigger question. Can Eubank finally step out of his father's shadow? Chris Eubank Jr.'s career has always existed in a strange middle ground, respected, well-known, but never quite breaking through to the heights of boxing superstardom. He's not a prospect anymore. At 34, he's a veteran who has fought on big stages, headlined arenas, and built his name off both his fighting style and the famous surname he carries. Yet for every victory he's claimed, there's always been a lingering question. Has Chris Eubank Jr. truly lived up to the weight of expectation? The son of a British icon, he has fought under constant comparison to Chris Eubank Sr. Fans see the same swagger, the same sharp words in press conferences, but in the ring, the story has been different. Eubank Jr. has been good, sometimes very good, but never truly great. He's picked up interim belts, scored highlight wins, and shown iron determination. But he's also stumbled when the lights burned brightest. Losses to George Groves and Billy Joe Saunders became reminders that while he belonged at the world level, he wasn't at the very top. And yet, his career is far from finished. The rivalry with Conor Benn has kept him relevant, drawing mainstream attention and dragging his name back into headlines. Their first meeting went the distance, with Eubank controlling much of the action but failing to close the show. The rematch, which he insists won't go 12 rounds again, represents more than just revenge. It represents survival. If he loses, the door to super fights closes. If he wins, it swings wide open. Now, standing at this crossroads, Eubank has made his boldest move yet. He's not calling out domestic rivals or mid-tier names. He's aiming for legends. He's saying the next chapter of his story belongs alongside men like Terence Crawford, Canelo Álvarez, and Gennadiy Golovkin. Ambitious? Absolutely. Risky? Without question. But in boxing, ambition is the only currency that buys legacy. In the sport of boxing, call-outs are currency. Fighters can spend months, even years, circling each other through words before contracts are ever signed. But rarely does a fighter throw 3 names into the air at once, and names this massive. When Chris Eubank Jr. told Sky Sports he was open to facing Terence Crawford, Canelo Álvarez, and even Gennadiy Golovkin, the headlines practically wrote themselves. For some fans, the reaction was excitement. At last, Eubank was showing the ambition to chase greatness rather than playing it safe. Others rolled their eyes. How could a man who still hasn't become a world champion expect to land fights against 2 pound-for-pound kings and a returning legend? Was this genuine hunger or a publicity grab to stay relevant in a crowded division? What makes the call-outs even more intriguing is their timing. Terence Crawford is fresh off shocking the boxing world, defeating Canelo Álvarez and claiming undisputed status at super middleweight. Canelo, despite the loss, remains the biggest star in the sport. And Golovkin, though retired, is still a name dripping with unfinished business, especially given Eubank's failed negotiations to fight him years ago. Each name represents a different test. Crawford is skill incarnate, a man who has dismantled opponents from lightweight all the way to 168. Canelo is the ticket to superstardom and the largest payday in boxing, and Golovkin is the ghost of a fight that never happened, now dangling as a chance for redemption if the Kazakh returns. Fans may laugh, but there's no denying one truth. Eubank has put himself back into the conversation. Whether or not these fights are realistic, his ambition has sparked debate, and debate sells fights. But among the 3 names he dropped, one stands out as particularly fascinating, not just for what it means to boxing, but for the personal ties it carries. That name is Terence Crawford. To understand why Eubank versus Crawford has fans buzzing, you need to understand who Terence "Bud" Crawford really is. He's not just a great fighter, he's an all-time great. From Omaha, Nebraska, Crawford has climbed through weight divisions like a man defying physics. He unified titles at lightweight. He became undisputed at super lightweight. He dominated and became undisputed at welterweight. And now, in one of the most shocking moments in recent boxing history, he defeated Canelo Álvarez to become undisputed at super middleweight. 3 divisions, 3 undisputed crowns. Nobody in the modern era has done what Crawford has done. So what would Eubank bring to the table? Size, first and foremost. At 5 feet 11 inches with a strong frame, Eubank has campaigned at middleweight and super middleweight for years. Crawford, by contrast, is a natural lightweight who has grown into 147 and now 168 through sheer brilliance and adaptability. On paper, the size gap could be Eubank's greatest weapon, but the danger lies in Crawford's skill. He switches stances effortlessly, controls distance with terrifying precision, and has a knack for breaking fighters mentally before before breaking them physically. What makes this matchup even more compelling is the personal link. Eubank is currently training under Brian "Bomac" McIntyre, who happens to be Crawford's longtime trainer. That means the men closest to Crawford are also shaping Eubank. In a sport built on narratives, this adds another layer. Can Bomac's influence turn Eubank into the man who finally tests Crawford's climb through the divisions? Skeptics will scoff. They'll say Crawford is on another level entirely, that Eubank lacks the pedigree to share a ring with him. But that's what makes the idea so irresistible. In boxing, styles make fights, and while Crawford is the master technician, Eubank is bigger, stronger, and willing to throw volume. Could that combination create problems for a man chasing history? One thing is certain. If Eubank wants to announce himself as more than his father's son, fighting Terence Crawford would be the most audacious and dangerous way to do it. And if Crawford is the perfect storm, then Canelo Álvarez represents something even bigger, the golden ticket to boxing superstardom. For any fighter dreaming of superstardom, one name shines brighter than all the rest: Canelo Álvarez. Even in defeat to Terence Crawford, Canelo remains boxing's most marketable name, a walking empire with global appeal. From Mexico to Las Vegas to Saudi Arabia, his fights transcend the sport, pulling in celebrities, casual fans, and diehards alike. Facing Canelo isn't just about glory, it's about entering the biggest spotlight boxing has to offer. For Chris Eubank Jr., a fight with Canelo would mean more than money. It would be validation. Eubank has fought big names before, but none at this magnitude. To stand across from Canelo would instantly elevate his career from domestic talking point to global headline. Win or lose, his name would be etched into the history books as part of the Canelo era. That alone is enough to entice him. But what about the fight itself? Canelo is a counterpuncher with granite defense and devastating body shots. He thrives on fighters who throw volume without precision, waiting to punish every mistake. Eubank, with his high output and grit, could fall right into those traps. Yet, Eubank does bring weapons Canelo has struggled with: size, stamina, and the ability to stay busy across 12 rounds. Against fighters like Dimitri Bivol, Canelo looked less effective when dragged into long, high-paced fights. Eubank would try to replicate that strategy, though the question is whether he has the polish to pull it off. Still, a fight with Canelo isn't just about the X's and O's. It's about what it represents, the chance for Eubank to step into the brightest light boxing has to offer. And while Crawford might be the most dangerous opponent, Canelo is the one that could change Eubank's life forever. Yet there's another name, one that's haunted Eubank longer, one that fans still talk about as unfinished business: Gennadiy Golovkin. Long before Crawford shocked the world or Canelo became boxing's global superstar, there was Gennadiy Golovkin, the middleweight monster who struck fear into everyone in his division. Back in 2016, the boxing world buzzed with talk of Eubank Jr. facing Golovkin. Negotiations were underway. The fight was nearly signed, but at the last moment, it collapsed. And instead, Kell Brook stepped up from welterweight to take the fight. Golovkin demolished him, and the what if of Eubank versus GGG has lingered ever since. Now, years later, Golovkin has retired, but whispers of a comeback have surfaced. At 43, GGG may not be the wrecking machine of old, but his name still carries weight. For Eubank, this fight would mean redemption, writing the unfinished chapter that slipped through his fingers nearly a decade ago. It wouldn't be the same as beating prime Golovkin, but the narrative would sell itself, the fight that never happened, finally happening. Stylistically, it's fascinating even now. Golovkin, though slower, still carries thunder in his fists. His jab remains one of the best weapons in middleweight history, and his chin has proven granite even against Canelo's bombs. Eubank would bring youth, relatively speaking, activity, and hunger. Could he finally do what others couldn't and outlast GGG? Or would Golovkin, even in his 40s, remind the world why he was once the most avoided man in boxing? But here's the catch. All the ambition in the world doesn't matter if Eubank doesn't handle business at home first. Before chasing legends, he has to survive the fight that defines his career in Britain, the rematch with Conor Benn. Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn isn't just a fight. It's a family saga, a clash born from the legacies of their famous fathers. The first fight between them kept the rivalry alive, but left fans unsatisfied. Eubank outworked Benn, controlling much of the action, but failed to close the show. Benn, smaller yet relentless, proved he belonged in the ring with the bigger man. The rivalry remains unsettled, and the rematch looms as a fight neither can afford to lose. For Eubank, this fight is a gatekeeper. Beat Benn convincingly, and he secures his ticket to bigger stages. Lose, and everything else vanishes. Crawford, Canelo, Golovkin, none of them will line up if he can't beat a man still climbing toward elite level. That's why Eubank has promised the rematch won't go 12 rounds. He insists he'll finish Benn, that he'll erase doubt and silence critics once and for all. The stakes couldn't be higher. In many ways, the Benn rematch is the most important fight of Eubank's career, not because of titles or money, but because of what comes after. If he fails here, the conversation about Crawford, Canelo, and Golovkin ends abruptly. If he wins, especially with authority, those doors swing wide open again. And that's where the tension lies. Eubank's ambitions are grand, but they rest on a single fight against Conor Benn. To chase legends, he must first win at home. The question now isn't just whether he can land the fights he wants, but whether he can even earn them. It's easy to call out big names. The harder question is, which fight can actually happen? On paper, all three are possible, but the likelihood varies. Terence Crawford may be the most realistic. The timing is perfect. Crawford has momentum after beating Canelo, and Eubank's link with Brian "Bomac" McIntyre makes the narrative seamless. Add in the size difference, and it becomes a classic story. The great technician daring to challenge a bigger man. For promoters, that's an easy sell. Canelo Álvarez, meanwhile, remains the golden ticket, but he's also the least likely. Canelo's priorities are clear: a potential rematch with Crawford or other massive paydays in Saudi Arabia. Unless Eubank pulls off something spectacular in the Benn rematch, he's not at the top of Canelo's list. Still, boxing has taught us one rule: money talks. If the right backers step up, even unlikely fights can happen. Then there's Gennadiy Golovkin. On one hand, it feels like unfinished business, the fight that got away. On the other, GGG is 43, retired, and may not want to risk tarnishing his legacy. But if he returns for one last dance, Eubank could be the perfect opponent. The fight has history, nostalgia, and just enough intrigue to make fans tune in. So what's realistic? Crawford first, Golovkin maybe, Canelo if the stars align. But all of these depend on one thing: Eubank proving he deserves them. And that brings us back to the stakes of his next chapter. Every fighter reaches a point where money is no longer the only motivator. It's about legacy. For Chris Eubank Jr., that time is now. He has already earned respect as a name in British boxing. He's made money, headlined cards, sold tickets. But when his career is over, how will fans remember him? As the son of Chris Eubank Sr., who never quite reached the same heights, or as the man who stepped up to fight the greatest of his era? The risks are enormous. Fighting Terence Crawford could expose him, make him look a level below. Facing Canelo could end in a brutal defeat that becomes a career-defining lowlight. Even Golovkin, aged and slowed, still carries enough danger to derail Eubank completely. Yet this is what separates ordinary careers from extraordinary ones. To chase glory, you must risk humiliation. And then there's the shadow of his father. Chris Eubank Sr. was a world champion, a showman, a man who carved his name into British boxing history. For years, Jr. has carried that legacy without fully escaping it. These call-outs, these ambitions, they're more than fights. They're his attempt to step out of that shadow once and for all. The stakes, then, aren't just about titles or money. They're about identity. Who is Chris Eubank Jr. when it's all said and done? The nearly man who aimed high but never landed the shot? Or the risk-taker who fought the best, regardless of outcome? The answer depends on what comes next. If Chris Eubank Jr. manages to land even one of these fights, the impact would ripple far beyond his own career. A matchup with Terence Crawford would be billed as skill versus size, the pound-for-pound great daring to test himself against a natural middleweight. It would be marketed as a clash of eras, a fight that answers whether pure technique can overcome physical disadvantages. Win or lose, Eubank would become part of Crawford's historic run. A fight with Canelo Álvarez would be different. It would be about superstardom. Canelo is still the sport's biggest draw, and sharing the ring with him would give Eubank a global spotlight no British domestic rivalry could match. Even in defeat, he would have written himself into the biggest chapters of modern boxing. And then there's Gennadiy Golovkin, the ghost of 2016. Beating GGG now wouldn't be the same as beating him in his prime, but it would still matter. It would close a loop, finally delivering the fight that slipped away. For fans, it would be nostalgia. For Eubank, it would be personal redemption. But beyond the specifics, these callouts prove something about Eubank. He's not afraid to aim high. In a sport where many fighters protect records and play it safe, he's daring to throw his name into the fire against the greatest of his era. Whether fans love him or doubt him, that ambition keeps him relevant, keeps his name in headlines, and keeps people talking. Legacy isn't always built on wins, it's built on daring. And by daring to call out Crawford, Canelo, and Golovkin, Chris Eubank Jr. has reminded the world that he's still chasing something bigger than belts. He's chasing immortality.